I'm Saranya Ramakrishnan, working as a quality lead at Vistock 360 for past 2 years. And I'm here to introduce our next speaker, Jon Fancey. So Jon is a program manager in Pro Integration team at Microsoft. And he works on enterprise integration, including Logic Apps, B2B, and other enterprise capability. So Jon joined Microsoft 2 years ago, and before joining Microsoft, Jon was MVP for 10 years, and he worked in integration space for over 20 years. And once again, I welcome Jon for presenting enterprise integration with Logic Apps. Thank you.
Here we go. Thank you very much. So it's great to be here. You know, a really awesome event every year, and it's fantastic to be back. And of course, for me, it's fantastic to be back home again for a few days. You know, it's been an interesting journey for me, joining Microsoft 2 years ago. In some ways, it feels like I've been at Microsoft for about 10 minutes. In some ways, it feels like I've been at Microsoft for 10 years. It's certainly, you know, been a massively, you know, life-enriching experience. It's been, you know, very, very cool. So what I'm going to talk about today is enterprise integration. I was kind of thinking about this last night, you know, because what is enterprise integration? I think somebody mentioned it yesterday. It's like, so what I'm going to cover is just the sort of a mixture of different things that you would typically encounter, because there's not really any sort of such thing as enterprise integration, right? These are the things you'll typically encounter as you're doing your job. You know, you have all these different disparate heterogeneous systems. You need to figure out how you're going to integrate from one to the other. So you need things like message transformation. You need, you know, flexible protocol formats and obviously connectors and everything else, because you just need to get the job done. So I'm going to cover a bunch of things that we've been doing in this space, you know, over, you know, relatively recent past, the last few months, and then sort of sharing some of the things that we're working on next as well. So, you know, specifically, I'm going to go back to batching. You know, I did a very quick, you know, overview of the new batching feature that I mentioned goes out this week. So I'm going to go into more detail about that and how that works. A quick lap around B2B and XML. You know, it was great to see the interest yesterday. You know, again, there's sort of show of hands, tons of people who are, I guess, either not using Logic Apps but using EDI and B2B, or using Logic Apps but not using EDI and B2B. I mean, how many people is that? Yeah, not very many, so this is great. So hopefully this is, you know, new content for you guys as well. I'll quickly cover that, and again, sort of a look forward again in terms of what we're doing in this space, particularly around operational monitoring. You know, as we sort of looking at customer usage and, you know, how they're growing with their, you know, hybrid integration environments. So we see people creating more things. And managing all of that and keeping an eye on things and monitoring it all starts becoming a challenge. And, you know, we understand that, so we're doing a lot of work in this space to improve that. And then just a few other things randomly at the end that I didn't really know where to fit. So, and the thing I will just call out right now, because it's true, and everyone said it yesterday and I forgot, is like, I'm probably more jet lagged yesterday than I was today. So this is just my way of saying that hopefully the demos will work, but if they don't, it's probably like yesterday where I do something silly. So. Okay, without further ado, so I just want to go back to this scenario that I showed yesterday. So this batching scenario, and batching is really a flexible, you know, messaging pattern in Logic Apps. You can use it in, you know, a lot of variety of contexts, and what's very powerful about it is the fact you can partition. So you can have a single batch where you're using a partition key, and then have a receiving Logic App which is triggering. Essentially in pieces, you know, so you can batch up by member ID as I did yesterday. You could batch up by any arbitrary, you know, value, as I'll show in a minute, and then release that batch on the criteria that you set. You know, in this case, the number of items that you have in the batch. You know, the way this works is that you have two Logic Apps. So you have a sender and you have a receiver. So you start off building the receiver first, because you have to create the batch, you have to name the batch, and once you do that, you can then create senders, and you can have more than one sender, because the receiver doesn't know about the sender, it's only the sender's knowing about the receiver. It has to know the batch, and the trigger that's associated with the batch ensures that everything all sort of works and the magic happens, that batching trigger will fire as batches are full, and then the Logic App will run and process all the items in that batch, and it receives that as an array, and you can just spin over that and process each item in the batch. Which is really flexible, right? Because you can have multiple batch senders on one batch receiver, and you can use partitions to group by whatever arbitrary value you have, whether it's customer ID or something else, to kind of create these arrays of items, messages or whatever, that you can then process flexibly in your receiving triggering Logic App. Okay, and just one thing actually I'll mention because before I get into the demo, there's a few things coming soon as well. So what I showed yesterday is that right now, that what's going out this week is based on the number of items. So the trigger that you set is a numeric value that says, I want 10 items in this batch, and when I hit that 10 items, I want that trigger to fire, and then I'm going to run that logic app and all the, the steps that are involved in it. We're going to be adding more to that. We're going to be adding time-based release as well, so you'll be able to say, after an hour or whatever, that I want to be able to fire that batch on that sort of schedule as well, because obviously you don't want to wait all day for those 10 items. You may actually want to release a batch earlier. And the other thing we're adding is a way of having a batch release action as well, so that you can sort of dynamically release that batch and process it in whatever state it's in, with however many items it has in that batch, so that you can sort of signal that you want the batch to complete and then process the items in it. And then the other thing we're adding is EDI batching. Now, this makes total sense if you're one of the EDI guys in the audience who raised your hand yesterday, that it's a very common scenario for EDI that you want to batch everything up, maybe by message type, 997 acknowledgements, whatever it is, that you want to put them all together, which will ultimately sort of transpire to probably being a file that you send out over FTP with all those batch acknowledgements that you send to your trading partner. But there's a lot of other things you can do with batching as well. You could do things like load leveling, even where you're sending, to essentially different sharded batches to control back-end load, and just sort of drop message in the batches and release it and kind of control how many things you have going concurrently using batching as well. So, really excited to see, what you guys do with this. Right. So, without further ado, let's build one of these things. So I kind of showed it yesterday, and we always say, this stuff's really easy, and it takes you 5 minutes. But hopefully I'm going to prove that now. But remember the jet lag comment, so we'll see. Right, so, and the Wi-Fi is interesting as well. Right, hang on, let's try refreshing this. Okay, that looks better. Right, so all I need to do is create a couple of logic apps. So let's call this logic app, I don't know, my receiver, and put it in my favorite resource group. I think that'll do. If I click create, I'm just going to create this new logic app. The wheels will spin for a few seconds, and then the designer will load, as you've seen a bunch of times over the last 24 hours, and then I can go in and create my badge. Okay. Let's go. Right, so in the designer, once I get past all this great stuff, you guys are all experts, right? So you just do the same thing as me and breeze straight past that. If I type in batch, because this is the trigger, right? This is the logic app that's going to fire on the batch being created and complete. You see the great new batch trigger that I have. And I give it a batch name, so let's call it, I don't know, integrate demo batch. I'm just going to cut and paste that because that's kind of important. Then I put in a message count. Remember, we're going to be adding time-based release as well, and also the ability to release dynamically. So I'll do that. I'll probably want to do something with the batch as well, because it's going to have multiple items in it, right? So actually, I'm going to send myself an email. So this is my spam demo. So I'm going to click Outlook and send an email. Hopefully, it's going to pick up my Contoso products email you used yesterday, right? So Contoso products, I'm just going to send it to myself. And I can give this thing a subject. Now, you see over here, I have a whole sort of bunch of properties that I can use, like the batch name, the message ID, and the partition name. So let's just put in a subject, and then I'm going to sort of put all of these things in the body. I'm just going to grab the whole lot. Now, you see what happens straight away. It's like, logic apps is super helpful. It's really quick, right? So it says, I realize you're using an array here, which is a batch, because that's what I received. So it's like it just wraps this thing in a for each, because it expects me to want to enumerate over all the items in the batch, which is exactly what I want to do. So it just sort of speeds things up even more, and I put in the partition name as well. And I'm going to save that, and that's it, right? I mean, obviously, I could be more elaborate and do whatever I want with the items in the batch, but for this, that's it. I will go back. Right, so that's my receiver, Now let's create a batch sender. So another logic app. Create this guy. Let's call this batch sender and use existing, same thing. And I'll create this thing. I'm just going to go through the same process. Now this time I need some way of triggering this logic app to generate the items that I'm going to be putting in the batch. So I'm just going to use a recurrence and just run this thing every second. Because really what I want to do is generate a load. I want to generate these full batches so I can send to the other guy and trigger on each one of these batches being complete, and then hopefully receive a bunch of emails in my inbox. Okay, that's done. Open this thing up. And right, another blank logic app. Cogs spinning. Right, schedule. So, just going to run this on a recurrence, and because we don't have a lot of time, thanks Jeff, I'm going to set this to 1 second, and I'm going to add an action. So every second this logic app's going to fire. Renee's looking at me like this is going to cost us a fortune. And I'm going to, especially if I forget to shut it off, so I'm going to now send to batch. You can see what's going to happen here. So I get this send to batch action. I click this. Now, what I'll then see is all of the logic app batches that I have. So it knows that I created a logic app that has a batch trigger. So it enumerates all the batch triggers I have available. And which one did I create as batch receiver? Which one? Sorry, I can't hear. My receiver, yeah, that's what I thought. I was just checking. So, I told you I was jet lagged, right? Yeah. Okay, so batch name, I did paste that in. So that's my integrate demo batch, and then message content. Now, I'm going to use one of these fantastically powerful workflow expressions that Jeff was just showing, and I'm going to do that. Now, as we all found out recently, the team, right, that for those of you who didn't do computer science degree in the last couple of years, it's inclusive on the left-hand side and exclusive on the right-hand side. So I'm going to, actually, I might change this to 6. So this is going to generate a random number between 1 and 5. And I'm just going to save this down and move over to the left-hand side, and hopefully stuff will start happening. I've forgotten to do something. Hang on a second. I didn't do this. I need to, excuse me. I meant to put this in the partition name and put whatever in the message content, because that's not going to work. It's not going to match to the partitions that I created. Right, let's see if I messed that up. Okay. Let this thing run. It should be spinning away. Now, every second, you can see I have a whole bunch of these things already. And then on the batch receiver, hopefully what I will see happening is that what's happening here is I'm generating a random number. I'm using that as my partition key, and then I have a batch receiver, which is batching every 5 items on each unique partition key. So I'm generating a number between 1 and 5, so every single time I randomly put 5 items in that partition key with that number, it's going to fire another logic app. You can see I've got 5 here already, which makes sense, and they'll all should complete in a second. And they should start sending me email, which I think will be over here. Let's have a look. I'm not sure why it's not sending me email, because they're all kind of running away. Getting more and more and more of this stuff. Maybe I should shut it down and let it catch up. Yeah, must be something wrong with my connection. But you kind of get the idea. I'll come back to this later. I'll just let it run another few thousand times while I'm talking, and I'll come back to it and see how many email I've got. Actually, I was trying this last night, and because I'm just using one of these trial Outlook accounts, and it shut me down because I sent myself like 4,000 emails in about 2 minutes. So I shall come back to this, and hopefully there'll be some email there. Okay, right. So let's move on. So I just want to cover this very briefly. I've talked about this before, but for those of you who aren't familiar with this stuff, I thought it'd be useful, given the show of hands yesterday, to just give a sort of quick recap. So central to our, what I call our enterprise integration features are things like the business-to-business protocols, EDI support, X12, EDIFACT, that kind of thing, as well as XML support. So then this really speaks to the flexible messaging, transformation, and other things that you need to be able to turn, one message format into another one over a particular protocol, whether it's a B2B industry-specific protocol, whatever it is, X12 for processing orders, invoices. You need that flexibility to be able to easily change these messages. We have great support for XML with XML transformation, and we have great support for JSON as well to allow you to essentially create JSON maps with actions like compose to actually create new messages and send those as well. And Jeff showed converting those to and from XML as well. Core to this is the integration account. Now, the purpose of this is to keep all of the artifacts that you need to kind of do that stuff. So it manages all the trading partners that you create, and that's really just configuration, right? I need to know who I'm sending this message to. I showed briefly yesterday using metadata to be able to put where you're sending it to, the URL of that trading partner in the partner configuration and look it up at runtime and then send it. So it's great for that. You then create an agreement which specifies the protocol that you're going to use to send messages to and from one another, whether that's AS2 for secure messaging, or whether that's X12 or EDIFACT if you're using a particular industry protocol. All of that information is stored in the integration account. The other stuff that's stored in the integration account are things like XML schema and maps. So transformations, these are XSLT based. And this allows you to do things like XML validation and transformation, again, between different message formats, including things like flat files. So you can receive a flat file, convert it to XML. You can create a flat file from XML and send it out. So, full bidirectional message format conversion. It also provides tracking. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later. But the way this kind of works, the diagram at the bottom is showing that you create a logic app, and then you associate an integration account with that logic app. So you're saying all of these artifacts that I have in my integration account, those schemas, maps, whatever, trading partners, as soon as I associate that logic app with an integration account, it's then super easy to use the actions that we have, whether it's AS2 encode for sending out messages over AS2, or the transformation action for converting messages from one format to another. They're immediately aware of all the things that are in that integration account. So you can share that across multiple logic apps and use it for artifact management, all those things that you need to keep track of, rather than having to kind of keep hold of them yourselves or ending up in the logic app definition, whatever it is, other configurations. So it keeps things very clean and separated. You can then choose, when you pick one of those actions, one of the items out of the integration account. And I'll show that in a second. The other thing it provides is tracking. So it has an endpoint URL actually on the integration account. And that's really useful for being able to send tracking events from outside of the kind of logic apps environment. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you use Azure Diagnostics, which is a super easy way of being able to send telemetry out of logic apps to another system for monitoring purposes, and that could be storage if you want to do archiving, or maybe using your own monitoring system. It could be event hubs if you want to drive kind of downstream processing based on the events coming out of logic apps, all that telemetry information. Or it could be operations management suite or log analytics, which sort of underpins that as the query processing capability. And then you can add your own data as well. So every single time a logic app runs, we push out all this telemetry, every single action started and finished. You can do things like timing. But you can call this endpoint from your own code. Maybe before calling a logic app, we have a way of passing a correlation token into the logic app. And we'll then flow that through even when you call child logic apps. And then you can call an Azure function from inside your logic app and pass that into your function, which could be doing something completely different, right? And then use that URL, which you have access to at runtime for the integration account, and do more tracking. And the upshot of this is when you look at diagnostics and you look at, if you push this to log analytics, you can start searching for these things that you've tracked. If you want to record things like the order numbers or other arbitrary data, then you can find that information in your monitoring system, an OMS or your own if you are using a different one. So a very powerful way of being able to get end-to-end visibility across all the different events that are firing in your logic app ecosystem. Okay. Right. So before I get into that in a bit more, I just want to give a quick recap on this as well. I'm not going to go through all of this because there's just not time. Thanks, Jeff. The simple things are that we have the key takeaways are that we have great mapping capabilities, great validation capabilities, the ability to convert to and from flat file, to and from XML. Flexible processing, or the batching capabilities that we just in the process of shipping, and of course EDI and B2B capabilities as well. The common pattern is this, and I'm just going to let this draw up very quickly, is that I want, the typical order of events is that I receive a message in a Logic app, maybe it's an HTTP request, maybe it's from a service bus queue, it doesn't matter to us, it could be anything. And you want to, but the payload is XML, so you want to be able to validate that. You want to validate that against an XML schema that's in the integration account. Then you want to maybe extract some values from it. You can use the XPath expression to do that. So you can pull values out and work with that, maybe use that for conditional expressions. And then maybe you want to transform it. You want to convert it from one format to another. Particularly if it's a flat file, you probably want to convert it to something more useful that's schematized so that you can start accessing all the fields in that flat file and understand them. And the final thing you probably want to do, because there's no point just having a Logic app that just sits there taking in data and doesn't do anything with it. It's a bit like Jeff's example of the trigger where it gets pretty lonely when the trigger's just firing and not actually doing anything, or just skipping continuously, there's no work. It's also pretty lonely for a Logic app to be sitting there pulling in data and just forgetting about it, and it just ends up orphaned there for the next 90 days before we delete it. So it's much more useful to use one of our 170 plus connectors and actually send it to something else. So this is kind of the routing stage where you may make a decision based on condition to send that to a service bus topic, and then that has the ability to have multiple subscribers to that. So you can sort of fan out and send that message to multiple endpoint receivers. So, very flexible messaging pattern, sort of pipeline-based approach of processing messages in Logic apps. Okay, right. So a few things, because hopefully, who's done XML processing in Logic apps? Yeah, quite a few people. So I wanted to focus on some of the more interesting things that you can do, just to sort of make sure everyone's aware of the kinds of capabilities that we have to do this stuff. So I mentioned that we have XSLT. Now, one of the things that's very useful in XSLT is it has parameters support, so you can pass values in. And when you upload a map to the integration account, you use an XSL param or multiple parameters for your map. We render that in the card as parameters in the Logic Apps Designer, so you can now send values into that map and then pull them out in the XSLT and do things with those values that have been passed in, which is really useful, as you'll see in a second. The other thing you can do is you can put code, C# in your map. And that really, opens up a whole world of possibilities, because you can write code, which in some cases is often easier and quicker than writing XSLT, to be able to do, complex operations on that. We have support for the functoids in the same way as BizTalk provided these functoids. We have support for all of those as well. But if you want to write your own code, you can totally do that as well. And there's a couple of enhancements that we're just pushing out very shortly. Is that we are going to give you the ability to be able to specify the output format of the transform as well. So today, we assume that you want XML out because you pushed XML in, but again, XSLT supports multiple output formats. You can output sort of HTML or flat text. So, it's possible to actually emit flat files from XSLT, and we're enabling that by allowing you to select the output format to give you a bit more flexibility. Again, this is what enterprise integration is really all about. And the second thing is the byte ordermark handling. So today, if you've used the map, you actually see the byte ordermark sort of in the data that comes out. And sometimes you need to strip that off if you're not sending it to a downstream system that kind of understands that stuff. Depending on the encoding, UTF-8 is optional. So we're going to give you the ability to kind of remove that to save you a string expression to strip it off. Okay, so let's look at a quick example of this. Actually, let's see how this guy's doing. It didn't work. Wow, you think the send to email step would be the one that would work, right? Interesting. Something funky with my connector. Okay. Let's look at this insurance feed that I showed yesterday. How are we doing for time? So I'm going to open this up. Now, a couple of things I didn't call out yesterday that I'm going to call out now are that what this is doing is it's running a recurrence. I mentioned that the recurrence is on the last day of the month at 6 a.m. So what that looks like, Derek mentioned we're adding UX support for this, but a very powerful way of doing complex scheduling in Logic Apps. You can, provide this definition and do very arbitrary schedules, like I want to run every other Wednesday and these types of things. And in this case, it's on the last day of the month. Of course, I can run it straight away because, unless everyone wants to come back on Friday at 6 a.m. and watch this thing running, it's more convenient to do that. But let's look at this map. So on this transform XML, this is an example of what I was talking about. Now, I've got this map, advanced map. You can see the kind of picker. I can just choose one of the maps from my integration account because this Logic app is associated with it. I provide the content, which is just what I received from this stored procedure call, which is pulling all these visits from Contoso Fitness for the member ID. But the other thing I want to call out is this parameter. So if I actually flip over to this map, which is this beautiful XSLT, I have an XSL param mapping document. Now, this is a technique which was really hard to do prior to us providing parameter support in Logic Apps if you're used to XLT and other environments like BizTalk, that we've made very easy here. So what I'm doing is I'm passing in this thing, which is an XML document. So I'm passing in an XML document as a parameter. Now, XSLT 1 does not support that. You can't load an XML document fragment and then do XPathing against it, but C# in your map can. So I actually push that in and then have some code here which loads it into a DOM and then passes it back into the XSLT as a node set. And then that allows me to kind of do this stuff down the bottom here where I can XPath into that. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, the reason I'm doing it here is, hopefully you can kind of read some of this XML, is that I've got a list of states codes, like WA for Washington, and their full descriptions and the state capitals. I've got an 11-year-old who's just learning all the state capitals in the US. There are 50 states. He got 5 right. We didn't move that long ago, right? So it's kind of hard for him. It's like, good grief, this place is enormous. Who knew? So even the capital of Washington, like most people don't know what that is. So I thought it'd be useful to just kind of pass this in as a parameter. Now, if you're going to do this using functoids, what it often ends up being is that you use a database lookup kind of for each node, right? It's much more efficient to pass in the data as a parameter, and then you can refer to that data all over the place from your XPath without having to constantly go out to a database to do database lookups on every single field. So just a technique to be able to kind of push in configuration into the map and then pull all those different values out. Okay, so if I just run this, I'll sort of show you what it looks like. And just fire this thing off, and it should run immediately. And if I look at let's look at this first, because I should see the output of the stored procedure, which is just completed while it does the rest of it. I've got a function here, so I don't have warm start set on that, so it takes a few seconds to spin up. So you can see what I'm passing in is I'm passing in the member details, which was Jeff, I think, which we'll find out in a second, and the number of visits, 84 in the month. Awesome job, Jeff. That you must have been going 3 times a day. And a state of WA. It's now completed. So if I look down at the transform XML, we base64 encode this stuff. This is throughout Logic Apps, because you can pass binary data into this thing. So it's kind of binary in, binary out. But if I keep going down and look at the output HTTP, I should see that what it's done, in fact, I'll even do this. And because I'm more awake today than I was yesterday, I actually remembered to put inspect on the end of this thing, which is why it didn't work yesterday. Thanks, everybody, for calling me out in the coffee lounge afterwards. So if I just refresh this, what I should see is that 50 seconds ago, I get this. I get the raw body. Just zoom in again. And you see it's changed the state from WA to Washington, just using that lookup, using the parameter that I passed in. So, one example, actually, this is an example that came up very recently with a customer, and they're like, how do I do this? It's really hard. They weren't familiar with BizTalk, even with XSLT, and they actually were loading this from a DocDB or a Cosmos database. So they had a lump of JSON configuration. They just pulled out a DocDB, passed in that parameter into the map, and then could just reference it in XPath in the map. Very, very easy to do transcoding that way and maintain all those transcoding tables in Cosmos or even a SQL database. Divya saved me some time on this, so I don't need to go into too much detail, but I'm just going to show you what these logic apps looks like. One of the things that we learned early on, and I have to call out as well, it's been a great partnership over the last nearly 2 years with MSIT that Divya and Mike were talking about this morning. What she didn't explain was we've actually been having this co-development model, which is pretty unique, where we've had MSIT developers working with us. Divya is a program manager, and she's been working with me to make sure that we build the right thing for our customers. And MSIT is used as a representative customer because it's such a large organization. Imagine, running a company like Microsoft is kind of out there in terms of scale with thousands of trading partners. They shared some of the numbers. So they really help us keep us honest. It's like, is this going to scale? Is this going to be manageable? Is this going to be monitorable? Am I going to be able to maintain this? All that versioning stuff and everything else. To make sure that you guys benefit from all of their experience, as we do with them working with us. So, it's been a phenomenal way of working to get that kind of requirements validation. Obviously, we love talking to you guys as well, but obviously, the very tight relationship we have with MSIT as we work through this stuff has been great. So, one of the things that came out of that pretty early on was that B2B is about as mission critical as it gets. Companies have very stringent recovery time objectives where if there's a failure, they need to know, the business guys will start ringing them up and IT and saying, when are you going to be able to fix this problem because I can't ship any goods, right? And if you're a business in the business of selling stuff, which, if you're not in the business of selling stuff, you're probably not even a business, right? Then you need, you can imagine how it looks from the business side of this if there was an outage and it takes hours to resolve. So the intention with this is it puts control back into your hands. It puts that recovery time objective back into your hands and allows you to be in control. So, the kind of disaster events that Dan was talking about yesterday is, an earthquake hitting West US, right? It's those type of events where if there was disruption, not necessarily in one of our data centers, but it may be in the connectivity or even in your data center, how do, between us and you, how do you restore service as quickly as possible? So we built this feature, again, with our collaboration with our friends in MSIT to be able to replicate stateful information. So the integration account holds control numbers, these ICNs and other stateful information that you need to exchange using these protocols with your trading partners. And the way this works is that you create another logic app in another region and another integration account in another region, and you wire that up so that integration account receives via that logic app triggering on all the B2B processing that's happening in the primary region. I'll show that in a second so it becomes clear. So it's very simple. So just create a logic app that triggers every single time that integration account is used, the control number information is updated, and it will then fire and update that information in the secondary account and allow you to resume processing. Now, it's so simple, we actually have a template that we put out on GitHub. You can just click that link, and then sort of you get this Azure deploy button, and you can see this working. It'll create the two logic apps, it'll create the two integration accounts, primary and secondary. You can try this out for yourself and see how it works. So, this is the normal state of affairs. On the left-hand side, I have a primary. On the right-hand side, I have a secondary. That's all dark because I'm not doing any processing in that secondary node. So, I can put Traffic Manager there. I mean, Traffic Manager is actually an implementation detail of API management now with its geo redundancy. So, acting as a network switch, all the data you use APIM as that endpoint goes to the logic app. If you're using AS2, HTTP-based protocol. And, maybe that's hitting some back-end system on premises like, SAP or your ERP system. But the other thing it's doing is it's communicating with this integration account because it's pulling data out of it. Remember that all the schemas and maps and trading partners and agreements are all in there, and certificates, which the private keys are in Key Vault. So a lot of interaction happening in this primary region as during times when it's healthily operating. But the other thing that's happening is you have a synchronizing logic apps in the secondary region, which is triggering on updates occurring in the primary integration account. And that's a logic app doing that, and then that pushes that data into the secondary integration account. So that in the event of failure, you kind of switch things around, and the right-hand side becomes the primary. You reroute from your customers to reroute that traffic to the secondary API instance, and then that will hit the secondary logic app to process the data in the same way as it was done in the primary, this time talking directly to that integration account and doing, the synchronization logic app isn't needed. You can actually synchronize to a third region if you wanted to, and you can even, from the primary, have multiple secondaries as well, so you can push data to multiple locations if you're really paranoid about this stuff. So a very flexible way of doing DR. Let's just have a quick look at what that looks like. I think I'm running out of time as well now, right? So, it's down here. So what I have is I have a secondary integration account, and then I have this AS2 secondary. So we have this by protocol, as Divya mentioned, so because there's the control information by protocol AS2, X12, and Edifact. If I just open this thing up, you'll see there's hardly anything in it. It's just a trigger. In this case for AS2, when a MIC value is created, it'll trigger from the primary state and then just update the secondary integration account. So you can see this one is connected to, to zoom in a bit, connected to the primary integration account. And then this one is the second step, which is storing that away. Is connected to the secondary integration account down here. Okay, and that's it. That gives you disaster recovery, right? Pretty slick. Imagine how much time this takes when you think about doing this stuff on premises and you've got your own 2 data centers you're trying to manage and doing this kind of B2B switching and traffic and replication of all of this stuff. So, I don't know why it's not Service Bus Explorer, but let's close that down again. So, very simple way of getting, high availability across regions, so you have predictability on your recovery times. Okay, let's move on. I told you this was a smorgasbord of enterprise integration topics. So one of the final things I want to talk about is monitoring and tracking. So I mentioned the integration account with the API, and that's great for being able to track events from outside of Logic Apps. It's also very easy to use. You just turn on Azure Diagnostics, and you see these options for storage, event hubs, and log analytics, and that's it. We just start pumping data down this pipeline, and it appears in one of those syncs. The other thing you can do is track properties. Now, I think Jeff is going to talk about this later, so I don't need to go into too much detail. But essentially, in your Logic app itself, you can use track properties against the actions to provide your own data items that you want to push through to that sync as well, log analytics. And this is super useful because we can't track everything. I mean, we understand these B2B protocols and all this control number stuff and a bunch of other things related to that. But, when you have order numbers and other things that you want to track, invoice numbers, whatever it is, customer names, anything, you can use track properties to decorate your Logic app to be able to push this data through to that endpoint sync as well, and that'll all light up in OMS, and then it becomes indexed, and you can search on it. So you can quickly find by a particular data item that you've defined, that tracks information, that failure, whatever it was, that original Logic app execution, and diagnose what the problem is and fix it very quickly. Okay, before we get into that, just to quickly sort of show you what I'm talking about again, if you've not seen it, is this. So, that's typical. So this is the dashboard. So some people aren't aware of this, even people who are doing B2B with Logic Apps, that we ship an out-of-the-box OMS dashboard for B2B. So again, just trying to get you up and running as quickly as possible so that you don't have to kind of create all this stuff. You just turn on Azure Diagnostics on the integration account because you push data from that as well, and from the Logic app, and you get all the telemetry information pushed in. And then you just go to the solutions gallery over here, and you'll see this Logic app B2B messages tile pop up. Now, this is pretty empty. A lot of products do the same thing, so you can really create a single pane of glass for all the different solutions in OMS. And even create your own tiles. You can write queries and pin visualizations to them, whether it's just simple counters or like a sort of donut, in this case, pie chart for showing status across different logic apps. But you see, at the top level, I see, success, pending, or failed. We also have a mobile application for this, so you can look at this on your iOS or Android device as well. And when I click into this, each one of these tiles you could just swipe through on a mobile device super quickly. And we have 4 different views, again, by protocol, AS2X12 net effect, and on the left-hand side, by partner as well. So I can just drill in and see, well, I've got two successful partners, so there's nothing showing in that bar graph because it's all looking good. And if I click through into this, I could see each one of those interactions itself. And if I clicked one of these, I can even download the originally received payload and the outputs from that logic app. And you see it creates a zip file, which I can open up and actually see what was received. So again, all in OMS, I can manage across all the logic apps that I have, and what may be thousands of instances, and diagnose what the problem is and see what the original data that was received. You can see if I kind of open this up, we create a set of files for you that holds all that information, so that you can open each one of these up and you can see what was originally received, including the kind of stuff that you would see in the run history in the Azure portal, but this is on an aggregated view in OMS. Okay, so that's all great, and I'm going to run out of time in a minute, so I do apologize because I need coffee probably as much, if not more, than all of you do. So I want to sort of look ahead. So it's great that we have B2B OMS solution. The thing we're looking at right now, and again, Divya has been helping me with this and doing awesome work, is how do we make this more generic and broaden this out to provide OMS for any logic app? So this is our thinking so far. So I just want to share this with you guys because it'd be great to hear your feedback, if this makes sense, if you think we're covering the right scenarios, if you think you'd use this, because we've essentially gone through the entire design phase now with this, so we're ready to build this. As we've been saying over the last couple of days, we build things pretty quickly, so this is a great time to be showing you guys this stuff. So again, similar experience in the OMS portal. I have the logic apps runs. This time, there's nothing B2B specific about this. And if I clicked on that, then I kind of go through to, again, another set of tiles where I can see by logic app what's going on. I can see which ones have succeeded, which ones are still running, which ones have failed. I can look by status and drill into each one of these and get a different view on that data that we're pushing to OMS. I can even see trends, failures by category, and execution times. And this is pretty smart because we can detect anomalies again. So if a logic app normally takes 3 minutes to run, we don't want it appearing at the top because it happens to be your longest running logic app because it's doing a bunch of work. So we sort of do some math on that to determine whether that's normal or not, and we order the list based on the run times based on whether they're anomalous or not, and then you can drill into that and understand what's going on. You can then also, kind of just moving ahead, kind of drill down and see a list of the logic apps and even expand and see which logic apps that logic app called. So in this case, with this business controller, you just sort of zoom in on this a little bit for those of you at the back. You can see the business controller calls transform and calls LOB adapter logic app. So you can kind of follow the chain of execution as well. You can also see, whether it's been resubmitted or not in this column here. So, again, helping you manage this at scale is our logic app failed, and I have a whole list of logic apps that have failed. How do I know which one to resubmit? Well, I resubmit the ones that aren't set to true because I know I've already attempted to resubmit them and they failed again. So I can find the ones that I need to resubmit based on them being the most recent run. And these filter boxes at the top just let me, filter that right down so I can just see the ones that haven't been resubmitted. And then, over on the left-hand side, I've got multi-select. So I can even do things resubmission across all the logic apps that I have as well, in bulk. The other thing I'll call out is that on the right-hand column, we have all these track properties. So this is what I was talking about a minute ago, that I can put this track property definitions into my logic app and then track any of the arbitrary data items that I'm interested in, and that'll all show up here. So I can see all this data here. I hover over it, and I kind of see this JSON object with all these values in. Again, because we've sucked all this in, you can filter by, there's, you see Best Buy kind of behind that would filter down all the, the rows that you see by that particular track property. So if that was an order ID, it would filter the list right down to that particular order. And then the final thing is that you can do batch download as well as batch resubmissions. So, the idea of just giving you more power and capability as your number of logic apps grows and the number of times they run grows. So you get this increasing problem of, oh, just good grief, how do I manage all this stuff? Because I've just got so much of it, I can't keep my eyes on it anymore. And OMS is a great tool for being able to kind of pull all this data in, index it, make it understandable, make particular data items discoverable so that you can quickly get to resolution if there's a problem. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, and this is pretty interesting, is OMS has a query language which was specific to OMS called OQL, OMS Query Language. This is changing in the next couple of weeks, and I've been working very closely with the OMS team, and they allowed me to share this today, so you're the first guys in the world to hear this. But it's moving to the same query language as Jeff showed yesterday with Application Insights. So why that's interesting is because it's far more powerful than the OQL language. For example, it provides support for things like joins. So I can imagine this is sort of tabular. It's actually a sort of NoSQL database. I can do joins across different entities. So now that I'm pushing all this data into OMS, and each event has a different type, so Logic Apps pushes events and other things push events, now I can join across all these different events and understand that and visualize that as well. So let me just very quickly show this. 5 minutes, awesome. Right, where are we? Go to another tab. And right here, this is what I'm talking about. So you saw that view with the OMS tiles. This is when you drill right down into that, you end up in log search, and this allows you to write queries. And this is just one example. So if I just run this, you'll see the types of things that you can do with this new query language, which ships in public preview in a couple of weeks. What this is doing is it's looking at all of my workflow runtime executions and plotting it by the duration average by day. So the categories workflow runtime, these are all the workflow events, the Logic App events that we pushed out, all that telemetry, and then aggregating that up and making it understandable. You can see, it's saying here that, there's some inflection point, right? So that might be interesting to look at because there's an anomaly. It suddenly shot up and then kind of went along sort of flat and then back down again. So, getting these visualizations is very important and easy to use. You also get this great IntelliSense, so I can do it by category and I can look at all the different categories I've got because it understands all the data that I have in my system, and I can see the enumerations of all the different things that it's indexed. Because like track properties, you didn't define a schema for that. You just threw it at log analytics from your Logic App. You don't care what happens. Automatically indexes those properties and makes them searchable here in OMS. A couple of other examples. Let's just show a quick one. This is an example of a join. So one of the things, I can't remember, Jeff talked about this, which is interesting in the Logic Apps architecture, is there's sort of different processing between the trigger and the actions that follow it. They're two different jobs. So that's why you see trigger skipped. It's just a job running, which may be polling an FTP endpoint for a file to arrive, and you just see skipped, and that job just runs every 5 minutes, whatever you set it to. And when there's data there, another job gets scheduled to actually process that data. So there's sort of almost two things going on in that Logic App. And they actually go to two different places. So with our join capability in the new query engine, you can join both of these together. You see I'm pulling the workflow run completed and the workflow trigger completed events, so I can get the whole thing together, and I can sort of run this and sort of see what that looks like. And see the start time and end times. Again, I could put a visualization over the top of this and understand by my Logic Apps, what their sort of run history is like, again, in aggregate, because this is everything that I've got running in my environment. Okay, now the final thing I wanted to show just in the last 2 minutes is, going back to Contoso Fitness, is this. So, sort of zooming back out again. So I had this scenario yesterday where I'm batching up all the visits. Every time you go to Contoso and you badge in or it recognizes your face, it logs that in a database. and batches it up. And every 12 visits, you get an email. Your insurance company gets notified. You get great discounts. But once you've done all of that work, and this is really what Jim was talking about yesterday morning, it's like once you've done all that work, it's super simple to add even more experiences on top of that. So what I'm going to show, oh look, all my emails started turning up. Awesome. Right on the end there, you've got a 2. Let's just have a look at this. You've got a 3. So remember, I just concatenated this whole thing together. So it's got the ID of the partition on the end of each one of these, it's all randomly. Okay, but that's not what I want to show you. I want to show you this. This literally took me 10 minutes last night. So I've got a bot. If you're not familiar with the Azure bot framework, it's definitely worth checking out, or the Windows bot framework. I mean, one of the things that shipped more recently is the bot service. This runs on Azure Functions. You just use basically a wizard to create a bot that you can then point at a logic app. So I thought it'd be fun, considering I'd already done all the work of kind of putting all this data in a database, creating a stored procedure that could pull the values out by member ID to use a bot. So just a simple example of this. And this literally took 10 minutes. There's like 4 lines of code I had to add to this thing, so I can just open this up and say hello. Kent Ware is going to go through a lot more bot information this afternoon, so which is great because I've run out of time. So, I just said hello, it says welcome. So now I could say, how many times did I visit the gym this month? When I hit enter. So this is using Lewis, our language understanding and intelligence service, which I'll show in a second. And you can see that even before I finished talking and explaining what it did, it's come back and said, you visited Contoso 84 times this month. Awesome job, Jeff. So I can, just to prove that's real, I'm going to add another visit. So I'm just going to insert another row into that database. Hopefully this will work and not ask me to log back in again. And if I ask the bot again, let's ask it a different question. Workouts did I do this month? Thinking about it, 85. It's real. So I just want to give you a really simple example. It's just, thank you. It's like expand your horizons. It's like, yes, this is B2B, this is XML, this is EDI, this is running my business. But all the things you can do on top of that are truly phenomenal with very little additional effort. You can use channels. I set up Cortana so I could do this on my phone. I could do it on my Windows device. I can just ask Cortana, and it'll run my logic app and give me an answer back. And the logic app is, 3 steps. Let's see if I got this thing open. Yeah, over here, I've just got this visit checker. This is the logic app that's being called, and we'll see the run history again to show that there's no smoke and mirrors with this thing. You can see that, it ran twice, 1044, 1043, and if I edit this, open this up, see, all it's doing is it just received an HTTP request from my bot, then runs my stored procedure, which I had anyway. I had to do that work anyway to kind of do all the other stuff with doing all that insurance company integration. Does a compose to create a JSON object and sends the response back of the data that I received in the database. Very, very simple way of doing things. I think that's it. Actually, one more thing. Sorry. Not that I'm just begging for another round of applause, but thank you. One more thing. Another thing that should go out this week as well is our Azure File Service Connector. This is one of our top user voice asks. I know, great to hear the cheers. So this is going out this week as well. Again, Kevin talked yesterday about just the sheer cadence of connectors that we're shipping, and Azure File is one of the popular ones that people have been asking for, so that goes out this week as well. So thank you.